International Foundation promotes democratic governance, the rule of law, greater equality, and civil society, especially youth, women's organizations, and independent media in Northern Central America and Mexico. It does so through its grant-making programs such as the Anti-Impunity Fund, the Independent Journalism Fund, and the Central America-Mexico Youth Fund. It also furthers these agendas through convening such as the Central America Donors Forum, this year with over 800 participants and as a thought leader. The U.S. Institute of Peace was established by Congress in 1984 as a nonpartisan independent national institution dedicated to preventing, mitigating, and helping resolve violent conflicts abroad. And we like to think of USIP as a think and a do tank. As a think tank, we produce research, consult widely, and provide policy recommendations. And as a do tank, we design, test, and implement and evaluate peace-building activities and programs on the ground in conflict-afflicted countries. The Institute has more than 300 programs and initiatives in 85 countries, with offices in 16, including in our region in Colombia. So we have a great lineup of panelists today, and I'd remind you there is you can access the interpretation at the bottom of your screen, and there's also a Q&A function that you can line up questions for a little bit later in the webinar. So our panelists today include Alice Shackelford, who served as the UN Resident Coordinator for Honduras since July 2020. She was previously UN Resident Coordinator in Costa Rica and has worked on UN humanitarian and development initiatives around the world, including in Malawi, Pakistan, India, Cuba, Colombia, and the former Yugoslavia. She was born in Padua and holds an Italian law degree. Armando Ortecho is an attorney and the executive director of the Honduran Council of Private Enterprise, COHEP, running its day-to-day operations. COHEP is an umbrella organization for 70 trade associations representing all sectors of the economy. Its mission is to promote a positive investment climate and protect free enterprise. Jennifer Avila is the founding editor-in-chief of Contracorriente, an independent digital media outlet that publishes investigative articles on the most difficult issues facing Honduras today. Their work on how narco corruption, COVID-19, and back-to-back hurricanes have affected the lives of ordinary Hondurans received special recognition earlier this year from the jury that awards the prestigious Maria Moores Cabot Prize. Welcome. Michael McCarthy is an expert on Latin American politics and U.S. foreign policy who teaches at the George Washington University's Elliott School for International Affairs. He was also the founder and CEO of Caracas Wire, which focuses on the crisis in Venezuela and its international repercussions. So welcome, everybody. And let me turn it over now to Eric to start off with our first round of questions and give some framing. Eric?
Thanks so much, Keith. It's always a pleasure to work with you and have deep respect for the work of USIP and the Latin America program. So delighted to be able to organize this event together with you and your team. As you all know, and it's the reason we're together, Hondurans went to the polls on November 28th to elect a new president, 128 deputies to the Congress, 20 deputies to the Central American Parliament, and 298 mayors and vice mayors, along with 2,000 city council members across the country. The context for these elections was one of deep pessimism, to be honest. Nearly 20 candidates had been killed in the lead up to the election. The electoral system itself seemed to be designed to fail, and in some ways it did, when only 51% of the polling places were able to use the digital transmission system installed merely a couple days before the election to successfully report the vote count. The remaining 49% had to rely on old-fashioned methods of transmitting the vote count, and there were with that serious risks of fraud. The election itself was cast as a dire choice between 12 years of national party rule that was widely characterized by inefficiency, corruption, violence, and impunity. And on the other hand, the National Party framed the election around a choice between free market and conservative social and religious values versus an opposition they sought to paint as socialist and aligned with radical feminism and other dictatorial regimes in Nicaragua or Venezuela. And as if to confirm this pessimism that surrounded the elections, just 30% of Hondurans reported that, quote, democracy is preferable to all other forms of government, according to Latino Barometro's 2021 report. This means that Honduras expressed the lowest level of democratic satisfaction in Latin America, while an estimated 4/5, 4 out of 5 Hondurans believed the country was on the wrong path. This kind of toxic brew led many to expect the worst in Honduras on election day and thereafter. Many, including myself, I admit, expected elevated risks of post-electoral violence similar to 2017 if the results were questioned or the vote margins between the two leading candidates were very tight. But despite these well-founded concerns, the elections came off relatively peacefully, despite the structural weaknesses and hiccups along the way. The results were generally accepted by the population and international observers. Participation was higher than it had been in over a decade. Youth turnout was massive, and the results, while not yet officially certified, heavily favored the opposition candidate, Xiomara Castro. While it took a couple days, the incumbent National Party and its candidate, Nasri Asfuda, graciously acknowledged their defeat, and Asfuda himself paid a visit to Castro at home to personally congratulate her and call for national reconciliation. While there are still many questions about potential fraud, especially around congressional elections, the country and the international community seemed to breathe a sigh of relief the day after the elections. So let's, in this context then, we want to talk with our esteemed panelists, as Keith has introduced them, and ask them to reflect on this process. What happened and why are things maybe for the moment slightly more optimistic for Honduras? What are some of the surprises and what do you think are the challenges ahead for us? And I mean, for the Honduran people in the coming period. I want to start, we're going to do this as a series of questions, not presentations. And I want to start by asking all the panelists to just give us a brief reflection on what really surprised them most about the election on November 28th. Again, the context being quite negative going in. What was the thing that caught their attention the most, surprised them the most about it, and why do you think that happened? Let me start with our Honduran friends first. Turning first to Jennifer, and then Armando, and then later to Alice and Michael. If you could just briefly, and you're welcome to do so in Spanish. Otra vez hay interpretación en el icono al fondo de la pantalla, donde puedes escuchar la respuesta en inglés, or you can hear her answer in English. Adelante, Jennifer. ¿Qué te llamó la atención de los resultados del 28 de noviembre?
Bueno, muchas gracias, Eric, y a las organizaciones que hicieron este panel. Yo creo que una de las cosas más importantes es, y que me sorprendió, fue ver cómo la gente fue a votar masivamente a pesar de la campaña de terror que había en Honduras en contra de Xiomara Castro por ser mujer, por declararse socialista, por poner en su plan de gobierno que iba a aprobar el aborto por las 3 causales. Había toda una campaña de terror en contra del comunismo, ¿no? Y a pesar de eso, la gente salió masivamente a las calles. Yo creo que sí me sorprendió, a pesar de que soy periodista y que tenemos 4 años de estar informando a la población, aún así me sorprendió que realmente haya funcionado, que tanto el periodismo independiente como las organizaciones de sociedad civil hemos hecho un esfuerzo muy grande para que la gente fuera a votar informada y que al final esto sí diera resultados, ¿no? Ver cómo la gente rompió los prejuicios. No digo que con esto se acaba el machismo o se acaba la campaña de terror, ¿verdad? Pero sí, al menos al votar, fueron sin prejuicios y fueron informados de cómo hacerlo. También me sorprendió mucho la organización que tuvo el Partido Libertad y Refundación junto con el Partido Salvador de Honduras, porque yo creo que al final una organización de base muy, muy fuerte fue la que también impidió que hubiera fraude en las mesas electorales. No tuvieron una representación, hubo como un seguimiento y que eso no se vio en 2017. A pesar de las desconfianzas en el sistema y a pesar de que no funcionó de todo el sistema, definitivamente la gente pues rompió eso, ¿no? Y se hizo valer su voz en estas elecciones. Yo creo que sí es muy importante subrayar eso, ¿no? Que primó la información por sobre el prejuicio. Mirábamos Honduras y estaban todos los negocios cerrados, la gente tenía terror el día anterior y rompió ese miedo gracias al conocimiento que tenía sobre cómo votar y sobre la importancia de este proceso electoral después de 12 años de un régimen tan nocivo como el de Juan Orlando Hernández. Entonces eso quizá en resumen.
Gracias. Armando, ¿qué es su perspectiva y quizás la perspectiva de la empresa privada?
Bueno, nosotros desde la perspectiva del sector privado jamás creímos que iba a haber violencia al día de las elecciones ni al día siguiente. Se hizo un llamado a la población de que tuvieran calma, que fueran a votar masivamente, porque lo único que podía determinar las elecciones era que la población saliera a votar. Y eso lo hizo. Y eso es admirable. Todas las encuestas que realizó el sector privado desde el mes de agosto a esta fecha, y especialmente las dos últimas encuestas de los últimos 15 días, demostraban quién iba a ganar y cómo ganó. O sea, en el sector privado no teníamos desconfianza de que las elecciones iban a ser ganadas por la señora Xiomara Castro, que donde iba a estar, sí, apretada las cosas, iba a ser en el Congreso Nacional, y que el esquema de las alcaldías municipales iba a variar. Incluso las propias encuestas que tiene el sector privado demostraba que el Partido Nacional en el gobierno iba a perder las alcaldías de San Pedro Sula y de Tegucigalpa. Nosotros nunca pensamos que iba a haber violencia electoral, ni el día de las elecciones ni el día posterior, porque el hecho de que las personas salieran a votar masivamente, eso daba seguridad. O sea, quien le da la seguridad al Consejo Nacional Electoral no es lo que implementaron en el Consejo Nacional Electoral, sino que salió la gente a votar. Y eso, haber salido masivamente, evitaba que pudiera haberse alegado algún fraude. Los tres partidos que dirigen, lamentablemente, el Consejo Nacional Electoral no es un órgano profesional, es un órgano político dirigido por tres partidos. Ahí es donde estaba la duda. Pero nosotros creemos que a pesar de todo eso, de algunas inconsistencias que hubo antes de las elecciones y aún posterior, siempre se logró salir avante del proceso, porque el que salió a votar y dijo hasta aquí fue la población hondureña. Lo más rescatable es la participación de los jóvenes, en todos los sentidos. Los jóvenes salieron, fueron observadores, fueron a votar, fueron colaboradores de los partidos. El Partido Libre demostró que está preparado para estas elecciones en todas sus bases. Incluso había alegría en la población, por lo menos así lo percibíamos nosotros, que en la calle se percibía una alegría de parte de los partidos Salvador de Honduras y el Partido Libre. Y eso demostraba que posiblemente no iba a haber ningún conflicto. Y de hecho así ocurrió. El temor más bien del sector privado es que las elecciones las hubiese ganado de una manera apretada el partido de gobierno, que eso no ocurrió, pero sí lo teníamos dentro del esquema de análisis del sector privado. Reitero, para nosotros es una buena señal, una señal que se le manda al mundo. Eric inició manifestando que el 37% no creía en la democracia. Las encuestas del sector privado demostraban que el 67% estaba dispuesto a ir a votar porque creía en la democracia y no creía en ningún tipo de dictadura, ni de derecha ni de izquierda. Eso nos demuestran las encuestas que nosotros elaboramos antes de las elecciones, de manera presencial, no por teléfono. Y luego, el día de las elecciones, nosotros hicimos nuestra propia encuesta de boca de urna y demostraba que efectivamente la población estaba votando de esa manera. Esta encuesta de boca de urna fue a nivel nacional y demostró que efectivamente el sistema iba a funcionar, aunque se tardara, porque el TREP no funcionó al 100%. Se habrá funcionado a un 40%, pero eso dio seguridad, por lo menos en el ámbito presidencial, para que no hubiese conflicto. Y salieron los 3 delegados a mencionar quién era el que llevaba la voz cantante en cuanto a los datos que se estaban presentando a nivel nacional. Esa es mi primera reacción.
Gracias. Alice, any thoughts from where you sit at the UN, but in Tegucigalpa? Anything that jumped out at you?
First of all, thank you very much. And lovely to be with all of you. I think, the first, the pole position is with the people of Honduras. Women and men went out against the odds, against everyone's odds, to vote in peace and choosing democracy. And if we think that 70% of people voted, and you count that a part of the 30% who didn't vote, a part didn't have the ID card, so couldn't go to vote, and another part has migrated to the US or to other parts. So the reality is a very, very high number of people went to vote. And this is a huge change, I would say, for Central America and for Latin America, because it's exactly against the odds of all the data that we have, the lack of confidence with political parties, with institutions, but people went out and voted and gave the voting, and a thought vote, un voto informato, very thought vote, no? They didn't vote automatically, presidents, Congress, they fought across the 3 lines. So very, very, very informed. The Honduran people are very informed people and are very committed to really wanting a change. So I think, first of all, democracy in the midst of so many challenges in the region where we are is a huge message. And not only young people, of the 70% who voted, 42% are women. Women voted together with young people. This is very, very important also. So I think that is the first step. And there is hope. For me, the first message is that there is hope, and there is hope in a country like Honduras where hope has been lost for a long time. And the second that really kind of, did impress us, I think, a lot, is the electoral management body, and in particular the Electoral National Council, which, with all the problems of having had an electoral law approved the day before the start of the general the process, a budget approved not even 3 months before the election, they managed to get it organized in the midst of the high divisions within the council. And some of us who knows the ins and outs know that up to the last moment, that collegial nature of the National Council was at risk, and every minute on the 28th we had to also work on that. But what I'm saying, that was amazing, outstanding work in the midst of all the challenges and in the midst of many issues that still have to be solved for future elections. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. Michael, anything left to say? I'm sure you're at the end. Maybe everything's been covered, but good to hear your perspective here too.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you to the Seattle International Foundation and USIP for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with Armando, Alice, and Jennifer. I thought that maybe, since so much has been said about the national context and the very positive outcome from the perspective of democracy that we saw in the elections, that it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about the international arena briefly to round out the discussion. And what I would say there, Eric, in terms of what's surprising, is that despite Honduras being a small country economically and population-wise, it seems to me that the stakes of the U.S.-Honduras relationship are very, very high for the overall balance of power in the Americas, and in terms of the broader geopolitics surrounding the questions of recognition of Beijing or Taiwan, which is a big issue, and then also recognition with regards to which government in Venezuela is considered to be the proper interlocutor for the government in Honduras. So I think that there's a lot at stake for the Honduras relationship for the United States. And that's been demonstrated already by Assistant Secretary Nichols' travel to Tegucigalpa before the election. And I think that, I'll close with this, I think that, to add to the sort of good news that the other panelists have been sharing, I think that it is positive that, at least for the moment, the United States is not on a collision course with a new left-wing government in the region. It's still too early to tell with regards to where things will go, but the fact that we're not headed for a crash from the get-go perhaps opens up new possibilities for the way in which this historic ally of the United States will interact under this new administration, which definitely comes from the left, but moderated in the context of the election campaign.
Thank you. Let me ask a couple of specific questions now to each one of you. And again, for the audience, we will take some audience questions towards the end. So please avail yourself of the Q&A function para hacer preguntas at the bottom of your screen. You can be placing them there so we can prepare for that. But I will turn first to Jennifer to ask a couple questions. Quiero preguntarte en particular sobre el tema del Congreso. Si bien los resultados de la presidencia fueron bastante contundentes y claros y no hubieron muchas acusaciones de fraude masivo, sí vienen algunos cuestionamientos sobre lo que ha pasado a nivel del Congreso y veo que los resultados son bastante estrechos. No sé, los últimos números que vi era que Libre tenía creo que 44 y Nacional, el Partido Nacional 42. Va a ser bastante estrecha la correlación de fuerzas. ¿Qué nos puedes decir sobre esto de, primero, las acusaciones de fraude? ¿Qué ha sido la reacción y qué análisis le da a esto de la correlación de fuerzas que va a quedar en el Congreso? Si es que se puede decir algo en este momento. Adelante, Jennifer. Gracias.
Gracias. Sí, todavía ese tema está ahí, se está comenzando un escrutinio especial porque hay muchas impugnaciones, hay un alto porcentaje de las actas que fueron adulteradas. Yo creo que de entrada es positivo tener un Congreso bastante fraccionado porque hemos venido después del golpe de Estado, de tener un Congreso Nacional totalmente bajo el poder de un partido político. Antes del golpe de Estado era bajo el poder del bipartidismo, del Partido Nacional y Liberal, que actuaban solo como una sola bancada. Creo que es positivo tener varias fuerzas y digamos que no concentrado todo el poder en un solo partido. Sin embargo, sí lo que estamos viendo es la lucha del Partido Nacional por sobrevivir en este momento. Creo que estas elecciones y el mensaje que dio la gente sobre todo fue un mensaje de castigo al Partido Nacional. Todos sus caudillos básicamente no están quedando. De hecho, si los que quedan dentro del Congreso Nacional también de cierta forma representan una nueva generación del Partido Nacional. Vemos a candidatos, diputados que llevaban más de 20 años en el poder que no fueron reelectos. Es decir, siempre es interesante ver que aunque queden bastante apretados las bancadas Nacional y Libre, la bancada del Partido Nacional nos trae sorpresas con respecto a la caída de varios caudillos. Sí va a ser interesante ver esto. independientemente cómo quede, creo que no va a quedar tan diferente que como está ahora, sí bastante apretados, pero que para tener una mayoría van a necesitar hacer pactos y alianzas, y obviamente así es como funciona el Congreso Nacional. Pero sí va a ser bien complicado para el Partido Libre y para el gobierno de Xiomara Castro cumplir con ciertas promesas o compromisos que ha hecho ante la sociedad y que la gente está esperando. Por ejemplo, el tema de la instalación de una comisión anticorrupción e impunidad, ¿no? Que esa es una de las promesas, y eso es algo que también la gente espera con el tema de la lucha anticorrupción, porque si el Congreso Nacional no elige de manera correcta a un fiscal general, a un nuevo fiscal adjunto y a los magistrados de la Corte, a los miembros del Tribunal Superior de Cuentas en el 2023, va a ser imposible que una misión contra la corrupción e impunidad funcione. Es decir, ya tenemos la experiencia de la MASI. ¿Qué pasó con la MASI? Había una intención de la OEA, la gente lo quería, pero teníamos un Congreso que estaba totalmente plegado al Poder Ejecutivo por el Partido Nacional y que legisló en contra de la MASI durante todo su mandato y terminó acabándola, ¿no? Entonces va a ser muy importante ver cómo van a hacer esas alianzas, si la bancada de Libre va a ser una bancada fuerte, con quién va a hacer alianzas para poder hacer reformas importantes que necesita el país para poder regresar o para poder construir institucionalidad democrática. O sea, yo creo que es un gran reto. Sin duda, todas las cartas están puestas en el Congreso Nacional. El Congreso Nacional tiene que quedar conformado de una manera en la que se puedan hacer estos cambios. La oposición, que ahora más bien ahora va a ser el oficialismo lo que era la oposición, ¿no? El Partido Libre se convierte en el oficialismo junto con los aliados que elija, que aquí puede ser el Partido Salvador de Honduras o puede ser el Partido Liberal. Vamos a ver también el Partido Liberal qué papel va a jugar y qué intereses va a jugar también en el Congreso Nacional. Yo creo que sí nos ha dado una lección muy grande también en temas de reformas electorales, este problema que hemos tenido con el Congreso Nacional. Creo que de ahora en adelante también tenemos que pensar en que se necesita hacer una reforma para que las elecciones del Congreso no sean el mismo día que la elección de la presidencia. En primer lugar, la gente se confunde, es como una papeleta enorme la que y además hay que elegir presidente, hay que elegir alcaldes, es decir, es como todo en un solo día. Yo creo que no está funcionando, y luego al momento del conteo, que es donde vimos los problemas y estamos viendo los problemas, el hecho de que el TREP no funcionara en el 50% de las escuelas sí afectó el conteo de los diputados, porque son demasiados. Entonces, claro, y ahí es donde también se jugó el fraude un poco en las mesas electorales, porque tampoco todos los partidos políticos tenían representación en las mesas. Entonces, sí, hay un asunto aquí y una lección que aprender, y ojalá se hagan reformas electorales para que este nivel electivo se haga otro día y se haga con otros métodos que nos permitan no tener o tener un poco margen de fraude, ¿no? Pero sí, creo que bueno, que va a ser determinante cómo quede compuesto este Congreso, definitivamente.
Así que buenas noticias a nivel de las elecciones presidenciales, pero queda mucho por entender y ver en cuanto a las elecciones en el Congreso y la correlación de fuerzas allá. Don Armando, no sé si quiere comentar también sobre esto, pero me gustaría preguntarle, yo creo, si mal no recuerdo, y a veces no recuerdo bien, pero después del 28 hubo una de las primeras reuniones de la virtual presidenta fue con Joe. Y pues me interesa no necesariamente saber qué se dijo en esa reunión, pero ¿cómo ves las perspectivas de poder trabajar de manera constructiva, positiva, entre la empresa privada y la señora Castro, especialmente dado lo mucho que se dijo durante la campaña? ¿Cómo ves esas perspectivas? Adelante.
Bueno, solo quisiera ampliar un poco lo que dijo Jennifer. Yo creo que hay un análisis que se ha dejado de lado. Los tres partidos con mayor opción llamaron a la población a votar en plancha o en una sola línea. Y estos resultados del Congreso Nacional están demostrando que el pueblo hondureño votó de forma consciente por aquellos que podían ir a representarlos al Congreso Nacional. Ese es un análisis que lo han dejado de lado. Yo creo que es importante rescatar eso. Todo el mundo, por lo menos la población considera, y aquí en el sector privado lo habíamos considerado, los hondureños no iban a votar en plancha o en una sola línea. Iban a votar por los que consideraban que podían ir a representar sus intereses. Y eso ha quedado evidenciado en el Congreso Nacional. Nosotros no deberíamos de ver como negativo lo que está ocurriendo en que quede repartido el poder en el Congreso Nacional, porque eso va a obligar a hacer consensos en los temas importantes del país, en las cosas que quiere la población que se realicen a través del poder. No solamente que garanticen cuál es el apoyo que van a recibir de ellos mismos, sino que para la población. Nosotros debemos de estar esperando del Poder Legislativo y del Poder Judicial las mejores acciones en favor de la población. O sea, no hay que verlo como malo que esté repartido el Congreso Nacional, porque los va a obligar a que hagan una verdadera concertación en los intereses de los hondureños y del país. O sea, que no lo vemos de mal. En cuanto a lo que nos pregunta Eric sobre las primeras reuniones, sí, efectivamente, la presidenta electa llamó al presidente del COEP el día lunes en la mañana para que iniciáramos un proceso de diálogo con los sectores, de todos los sectores de la iniciativa privada. Y así fue como se logró un arreglo para una plática el día miércoles de la semana anterior, y se determinaron dos aspectos. Primero, se llegaron los miembros los enlaces de la presidenta electa, doña Xiomara Castro, llegaron al COEP. Era la parte económica, que dirige la parte económica de su equipo, y se logró determinar la creación de 7 mesas de diálogo para revisar los componentes económicos, fiscales y situación de infraestructura que puede tener el país. En ese sentido, pues el sector privado estuvo de acuerdo. Nosotros creemos que es importante avanzar. Siempre se dijo antes de las elecciones, tanto antes de las primarias como en las generales, que el sector privado iba a trabajar con el gobierno que eligiera a la población hondureña. Y así que fue bienvenida la solicitud de la presidenta electa de llamar a una reunión el día miércoles, si no me equivoco, fue el miércoles pasado. Fue buena, la presidió don Héctor Manuel Zelaya y Pedro Barquero, y creemos que vamos a avanzar en este tiempo para concertar algunos temas que se han quedado en el tintero gubernamental y que es necesario avanzar para el desarrollo del país, tanto económica como social, y también la parte política, porque como lo dijo Jennifer, es importante reformar algunas leyes electorales para la garantía de la población. O sea, no solamente lo estamos viendo desde el punto de vista económico, sino también del desarrollo social de nuestro país.
Thank you. Gracias. Alice, you mentioned in your opening remarks that the Hondurans voted in an informed way. And I think, that comment was also reaffirmed by Armando and Jennifer, that people were thoughtful. Tell us more about that. Why do you think that was possible? And I'd also like you to reflect a bit from your position at the United Nations, your role at the UNDP and UN Women and other UN organizations. I mean, what do you see as the primary issues that Honduras will need to address related to democracy and human rights, but also poverty and inequality going forward? And what are your hopes for the new government?
First of all, I mean, we are all very clear that the process has not ended. So we have to be very clear that no official results have been shared yet, and the process could take various weeks. The special scrutiny now, which is being made, the count by count in certain areas, is going to take time. It is very cumbersome, and we are expecting now the results in reality not much before the 20-something of December. You know that the final days is in fact the 27th of December, 30 days after the election. So first of all, we have to keep in mind that a lot of things are happening and there is a certain dynamic. For sure, the multipartyism is now a reality. And I think the biggest in that regard, the biggest challenge that in reality Xiomara Castro has as a president and the Congress has is to build that consensus that is so direly needed in this country. This country has been polarized for many years, has been utterly divided, and it needs to be rebuilt. The social fabric has to be rebuilt, and that's why the role of a private sector, of a civil society, of a faith-based organization and others is so critical in this. So I think it is very welcome that the president-elect is already looking at reaching out, and I understand that is part of the understanding very clearly in my conversations with her, is that she has to build bridges, and there's a lot of work to do because a lot of trust has been really eliminated in that regard. Also, I would say that Honduras is now probably one of the most strategic countries for the United States in Central America. And this is very clear. The visit of Brian Nichols, as Michael mentioned, there is another visit coming this weekend of high level as well. So I think this engagement and the openness also of the United States to work, to openness to work with whoever would win, it was also an important message. But I believe that really what was done in this past year was an incredible effort at various levels of various groups on really working to make sure that the 2017 crisis would not happen. So there was a lot of talk about peaceful election, votar en paz, vote in peace, a lot of elections, a lot of messaging around that. A lot of groups came out, as Armando was saying, calling for a peaceful elections. A lot of organizations and the UN, we were there with our voice, but many others. So I think a very, very strong understanding that this was a possibility of really for Honduras to show a different, as I always say, a change of narrative. This is a very important change of narrative in a country where everything is negative, nothing works, where everything is corruption, we're looking at, really rebuilding that hope. So I think that effort of civil society, that effort of the private sector, of a faith-based organization, except those who at the end ended up endorsing one candidate the week before the elections, but still they came out with a message about peaceful elections. All of those efforts were very, 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 very strong, and I do believe helped out in terms of getting and reassuring also people, and really the work naturally at the base in the community through the political parties and others in kind of spearheading and supporting that. But the international community was very clear. And when I say international community, I say the joint international community, United Nations, European Union, United States, OAS, some critical countries. We worked together since last year to keep also one approach and one messaging together, and also worked with all the political leaders in passing yet again the message that peaceful elections were really what was expected. And I would also want to add the very important role of armed forces. Now, the armed forces have been criticized for a long time. There have been issues, naturally, especially in the 2017 and 2018 crisis, post the 2017 election. But the armed forces really did a strong work inside of reshaping themselves, re-strengthening certain things that I must say I'm very impressed as well from their capacity also to pass the message that their role is to protect the constitution and to support the National Election Council in doing its job. So I think all a concertation and a jointness of efforts and really will for this to be different and not to repeat the crisis of 2017. So I think those elements together show also that, and I will just end by saying that the international community supported the new electoral census, excuse me, the new electoral census, the new ID card, which made possible a lot of elements for which the elections succeeded as well. The electoral reform in terms of having the three parties in the electoral management bodies, there's still a lot of things that have not happened, but it was also thanks to a very strong pressure that the council ended up having its budget and its reform. And so I think concerted effort, and it shows that international community working together with national leaders and national community leaders and organizations can make a big difference together in terms of supporting an environment, a much more peaceful and constructive environment.
Thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you one very specific question, Alice. Xiomara Castro has mentioned her desire to work with the UN around an anti-corruption mechanism. What can you tell us? I mean, we've been in discussion with all the main candidates since the start of the electoral process. With Xiomara, we had various meetings, and I had a meeting with Xiomara last week. I think the day after she had a team at the meeting with COEP and SEAL, and we discussed, this is a subject that we have discussed. We are looking at, naturally supporting a request. This is naturally for higher levels in the UN then to take, final decisions and so on. But we are willing to work together in helping prepare for the request of that commission. You understand very well, as it's been mentioned, that previous experience in the region are not of the most positive, and so there is a certain resistance at some levels, not resistance, but a little hesitancy in. But I think so there is a commitment, and we are working already together with the team in that regard. And we are going to have conversations with headquarters in preparation before the 27th of January. And we are also working on a strengthening of a more institutional strengthening program. And we are discussing together, this is not only as United Nations, but also together with US and other actors. We're already coordinating, and the idea is to exactly support the critical institution that need to be supported. And let's remember, this is a country which has an anti-corruption circuit, which has a system. So it's a question of also coming in and really supporting that very strongly. And this year also the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes opened an office here in Honduras. So part of the work is in that direction, but we are working very closely with Xiomara Castro and the team in this regard. Great, thank you for that. Michael, the advantage of being last is you can comment on what other people have said, so feel free to do so briefly. But I did want to ask you a little bit more about U.S. policy and U.S. relations. There was a lot of controversy and perceptions that the U.S. intervened or put their finger on the scale in 2017. And there were a lot of, really doubts about what role the U.S. was playing in Honduras. But based on what you said, it seems like Assistant Secretary Nichols came down, played a healthy role. Do you feel like the U.S. has kind of vanquished this feeling in Honduras? They're doing they lessons, they're doing a good job. What do you think we can expect from the U.S. Going forward with the Xiomara government?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'd say two things there. And then I'd like to sort of unpack the point I made about the strategic importance of the U.S.-Honduras relationship. I think the first thing is that, as I think Alice mentioned earlier, the U.S. made it very clear that it was going to respect the outcome of the election, whether or not it was a left or right-wing or centrist candidate. And that's clearly related to the Biden administration's broader agenda and commitment to global democratic governance and respect for democracy in countries all over the world. So I think that's the first thing to say. And then the second part is more sort of about power, quite frankly. And that is that in Central America, in particular in the Northern Triangle, Honduras is the only country recognized by the US in its official documents as an ally. The United States does not consider El Salvador an ally, nor does it consider Guatemala an ally, right? To use the technical term, which has its own intrinsic significance. And so the relationship with Honduras is very, very important. And then, given the fact that candidate Castro on the campaign trail had talked about changing recognition toward Beijing and the Venezuela issue, I think that made the importance of increasing channels of communication with her government once the presumptive president. Once she became the presumptive president, it was even more important to reach out and establish those early channels of communication along those lines. And when you look around throughout the Americas, if the relationship with Honduras doesn't go well, that means it's going to be harder for the U.S. I think with future governments of the left, which I'm not sure how many there will be, but it's clear that there will be other governments of the left in Latin America in the near future, right? So I think those two things are worth mentioning. And then I think when you review the relationship, there seem to be kind of three categories of interest to me, right? On the one hand, you have human security, development, and the fight against corruption. Then you have geopolitics and defense cooperation. And last, you have economics, right? And when you look at those three different arenas, I think you get a different, the assessment, I think, leads to different outcomes about the likelihood of either cooperation, disagreement, or conflict. And so to start with the first category of interests, the human security issues, the fight against corruption and development, there it seems to me that there's the greatest likelihood of cooperation and perhaps even complementarity between the two parts. Both have an interest in orderly or more orderly immigration. Both seem interested in boosting the fight against corruption, working with international bodies such as the one just described in your conversation there with Alice. And then there seems to be some type of agreement, I would say, between the Biden administration's view of delivering of democracy, delivering for the people, and what Xiomara Castro has promised in terms of a stronger social safety net with regards to education and health. So there seems to be a good amount of overlap, and perhaps therefore we could have some real opportunities for cooperation and even complementarity. I, in fact, would like to see the U.S. do something really big in Honduras, which is a country that lags very far behind, unfortunately, with regards to rural electrification. If the U.S. really wanted to make a statement about democracy delivering in a country that has a serious long-term problem with poverty, I think it should try and adapt some of the policies they've used in parts of Africa and in Southeast Asia to do rural electrification. And they could easily link that up with the new, attention being given to renewable energies and the broader energy transition. So that's one idea out there, I think, in terms of how to do something new and big, not just working on the fight against corruption and the rule of law, which has to be done, but looking at something else to really demonstrate the importance of the U.S.-Honduras relationship. When you move over to the issue, the area of interest kind of about geopolitics and defense cooperation, there I think we need to be a little bit more cautious about getting our hopes up in regards to an excellent relationship. There's the recognition questions about China. We've had the reversal from the candidates. And then there's the fact that I think Honduras recognized that it may be able to leverage its position within Central America as a preferred partner and ally of the United States to sort of work with all parties. If you look at the statements from Gerardo Torres, the main international advisor to Xiomara Castro, it seems quite clear that they're interested in having an open door policy with everyone and trying to get the most out of every relationship around the globe. And then you have the potential for any kind of revisions or changes to the defense cooperation at the Air Force Base, right? And any restriction on movement of US personnel, that would perhaps create some disagreement between the two parties. But I don't know if those disagreements will necessarily spill over into outright conflict because of how important the Honduras relationship is to the United States, given the regional context of a rocky relationship with El Salvador, a relationship that's not going so well with Guatemala, and then obviously you have Nicaragua, which is its own case, for the obvious reasons. And then with regards to economics, the United States, in my view, should be interested in the economic security of the Honduran state. And Honduras has begun preliminary conversations with the International Monetary Fund about renegotiating its debt. The current deal with the IMF lapses in January, right around the time of the presidential inauguration. And we've heard some sort of remarks of pragmatism, it seems, from the economic advisors of presumptive President Castro. And although the vision that Castro may have for the economy may not directly align with that of the Biden administration, it seems to me that there could be enough mutual interest in coming together to find a way to lower Honduras's debt service payments, to give it a little bit more fiscal space coming out of a pandemic, right? The economy contracted between 8 or 9% last year. It's going to grow a little bit this year. Hopefully it will grow even more next year. But they'll be looking for a kind of, a degree of flexibility, I think, from the United States and from the IMF when it comes to those upcoming negotiations. And that's a very serious matter, right? Coming back to the China situation, as Honduras has more debt toward China than it has toward the United States. So those, I think, are the three areas of interest. And, if I was a betting man, I would say that the U.S. is likely to start where there's areas of potential cooperation and complementarity in the human security, fight against corruption, and development issues. And if Vice President Harris continues to be a champion for Central America within the overall Biden administration team, it'll, of course, be very interesting to see her have opportunities to get to know the first female president of Honduras, right? It seems like a natural opportunity for the two leaders to get to know each other and strike up a good relationship in that regard. So you had asked me, earlier if I thought that Honduras could become, a preferred partner. I think the answer is yes, given the regional context, and then perhaps the sort of opportunities for a personal relationship between the vice president and Xiomara Castro. But then we don't know exactly where Xiomara Castro is going to land when it comes to foreign policy, since she is kind of running a coalition-style party at this point, right? They moderated, bringing on more conservative elements. But the base of the party clearly is much further to the left than the U.S. would like the next Honduran government to be. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Michael. We're running low on time, so I'm going to just summarize a couple of questions and really maybe ask Jennifer and Armando to give us their opinions, in particular as Hondurans. Una de las preguntas que hay es cómo va a poder negociar Xiomara Castro un gobierno, como ha dicho Michael, casi de coalición, con personajes muy grandes, diría yo, Mel Zelaya, Pedro Barquero, otras personas importantes, Salvador Nasralla. Ella, ¿cómo lo puede negociar o cómo lo puede hacer? O hay el riesgo que se convierte en simplemente algo que ellos están manipulando y usando. Ustedes tienen la esperanza que tienen esa capacidad. Y el segundo tema que surge, y lo he escuchado aquí mucho en Washington, es sobre la relación de Honduras con China. Y si va a dejar Taiwán y se va a ir a China. Yo creo que hay temas muy internacionales de geopolítica, pero me gustaría saber desde la perspectiva de los hondureños, los catrachos, ¿eso importa? ¿Les importa Taiwán versus China? ¿O esto es una preocupación de los intelectuales que estamos acá en Washington, preocupados por esas cosas, pero realmente en el último instante no es tan importante para el pueblo hondureño? Empiezo con don Armando, por favor, breve, y luego le paso la palabra a Jennifer a ver si Keith o los otros tienen una último comentario.
Rápidamente, Eric. Yo creo que el pueblo hondureño mandó un mensaje el día 28 de noviembre. Y el mensaje no es para ver si rompemos relaciones con Taiwán o nos adherimos a China. Aquí la población lo que está esperando es que le demos respuesta a sus problemas diarios. El agua, la comida, la educación, la salud, la energía. Esos son los temas que quiere saber el pueblo hondureño, cómo se van a resolver y quiénes deben de acompañar al gobierno para mejorarles las condiciones. Sobre el tema de la corrupción que ustedes mencionaron, el sector privado ha estado de acuerdo, que aunque puede venir una Maxi, una Sisi o como ustedes quieran nombrarlo, pero lo que quiere el país es que no haya corrupción, pero más importante es que no haya impunidad. En ese concepto es que fue a votar la gente el día 28. No pidamos de que Honduras se alinee con Venezuela, porque yo creo que el pueblo hondureño ya dijo que no quiere dictaduras, quiere la democracia. Y la democracia la hacemos aquí, no allá en Venezuela ni en China, la hacemos aquí en Honduras. Yo creo que el mensaje está bien dado, bien mencionado para los partidos que no quieran alinearse para el desarrollo del país, para mejorar las condiciones de la población. Esos van a ser castigados nuevamente dentro de 4 años. Si un mensaje nos dieron estas elecciones, es que la democracia se defiende con un voto, no con balas, como pretendieron muchos al meter miedo antes del 28. Yo creo, pues, Eric, que nosotros no debemos de preocuparnos tanto si va a haber una izquierda tirada hacia China o si se queda al lado de Estados Unidos. Nosotros creemos que nuestro socio principal son los Estados Unidos. Y no hay que equivocarse. El socio principal económico del país es Estados Unidos. No nos van a venir a ayudar los europeos, no nos va a venir a ayudar China, no nos va a venir a ayudar nadie. Los únicos que nos van a ayudar somos los hondureños para poder mejorar las condiciones, generar empleo de calidad. ¿Quieren ayudarnos los Estados Unidos? Sálganse de China y traigan las empresas a Honduras o al Triángulo Norte. Y estamos a 2 horas del principal puerto que tienen, que es en Miami, y o cualquier lado, 2 horas en avión o 1 hora en avión. O sea, tenemos las mejores condiciones para poder desarrollar y mejorar las condiciones. Nosotros debemos de evitar que la población hondureña se vaya a Estados Unidos. Allá son productivos. ¿Por qué no los podemos hacer productivos aquí? Porque tenemos que generar las mejores condiciones, que el gobierno deje a la iniciativa privada que desarrolle esas actividades para generar empleo. La gente se va a seguir yendo si no le damos las mejores condiciones para su desarrollo personal, familiar y social.
Muchas gracias, Jennifer. No sé si tienes algo que compartir aquí al final.
Bueno, yo creo que quería reaccionar a algo que dijo Alice sobre las Fuerzas Armadas, porque sí es algo que me dejó un poco inquieta, ya que, o sea, el papel de las Fuerzas Armadas en las elecciones es el papel que jugó, pero tenemos a unas Fuerzas Armadas que están jugando papeles que no le corresponden, y yo creo que eso va a ser un punto crítico en el gobierno de Xiomara Castro, o sea, cómo quitarle todas las potestades que tienen las Fuerzas Armadas actualmente en el país y el poder que tienen las Fuerzas Armadas sobre asuntos que no le competen. En el 2017, Xiomara Castro era mucho más contundente con el tema de las funciones de las Fuerzas Armadas y ahora no tanto. O sea, de hecho, hay muchos vacíos que todavía no sabemos sobre cómo va a quedar el plan de gobierno de una alianza, porque conocemos el plan de gobierno de Xiomara Castro, pero no conocemos el plan de gobierno de la alianza política que conformó con Salvador Nasralla. Hay un punto importante es el tema de la desmilitarización de la seguridad pública y de muchos otros aspectos, ¿no? Y yo creo que va a ser muy importante y va a ser punto crítico porque, como dije al inicio, Xiomara va a tener una presión muy grande por todos los sectores. Ahorita mismo aquí estamos diciendo sí, pues que se alíe con Estados Unidos y no con China, pero que la empresa privada, que no sé qué, pero el movimiento social también y la resistencia de la cual nació Libre le va a pedir muchas cosas, ¿sí? Y entonces hay que tener claro de que hay muchas demandas que se contraponen, ¿no? Entre la empresa privada y también la demanda de los movimientos sociales en las comunidades, ¿no? Yo creo que no va a ser tan fácil hacer un gobierno de reconciliación por muchas razones. Una, la ciudadanía está cansada de que la reconciliación se trate de la impunidad, y que, bueno, borrón y cuenta nueva, aquí vamos a empezar todos de nuevo. Aquí tenemos que ver cómo también la corrupción abarcó la empresa privada, abarcó muchos sectores que tienen que ser castigados, ¿no? Entonces, también eso genera muchas dudas en la gente y también va a generar mucha presión en el gobierno de Xiomara Castro. Luego también vamos a ver cómo Xiomara Castro se mueve alrededor de las tendencias regionales, porque no hay que olvidar aquí que esto no es un asunto solo de ideología. Tenemos a El Salvador, que no es un gobierno de izquierda, y a Nicaragua, que sí es un gobierno de izquierda, haciendo exactamente las mismas acciones antidemocráticas. Entonces, hay que ver cómo se mueven la tendencia, porque hemos visto, al menos públicamente, mucho coqueteo con Nayib Bukele por parte del Partido Libre o con Ortega, ¿verdad? No sabemos cómo vaya a moverse este gobierno de Honduras en el plano de reconstruir Honduras en este contexto centroamericano, ¿no? Yo creo que no es algo que podemos decir ya, pero que sí vamos a tener que estar vigilando mucho también cómo el gobierno va a responder a todas esas presiones. Yo creo que la ciudadanía misma está desde ya presionando y ni siquiera ha tomado posesión Xiomara Castro, ¿no? Yo lo que escucho de los jóvenes que dicen es que nosotros pusimos a Xiomara y nosotros la vamos a quitar. Y yo digo, bueno, ¿cómo así, verdad? Hay que también ser muy conscientes y no dejarnos llevar solo por la euforia que nos causó de que las elecciones fueran pacíficas, ¿no? Todavía la gente no entiende del todo qué es democracia, porque democracia no es ir a votar masivamente, hay que construir un montón de cosas. Entonces, sí creo yo que va a ser muy interesante. Yo soy periodista, estoy muy emocionada por ver qué va a suceder, pero sí eso, ¿no? O sea, creo que va a ser bien importante que la ciudadanía entienda que este es un camino que se comienza y que vamos a tener que hacer mucha veeduría social y mucha vigilancia de cómo el gobierno va a ir desmontando la autocracia si así lo quiere, o más bien siguiendo un camino de tendencia centroamericana hacia el autoritarismo igual. Entonces, bueno, eso quizás cerrar con esa reacción.
Alice, we don't have a lot of time, but if you have any parting comment here, small comment, and then I'll turn it back to Keith if you want to make any final statement as well. Alice?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the challenges are huge. 25% extreme poverty, more than 50% multidimensional poverty, inequality is rising. I mean, we have migration. I mean, the situation of migration, of mixed migration flows is very, very big. We have, from all sides. And I recently spent the night at the border, the northern border of Honduras, where the returnees, non-coordinated returnees arriving in the middle of the night. And this is extremely challenging, extremely challenging. So, I mean, the challenges are many. She's a female president, and she will not have it easy, because a woman is always judged twice or three times more critical. This is a very patriarchal society. So she's made it to the presidency, but it's going to be challenged, and we need to support her because a lot of attacks are going to get on her just because she's a woman. 4 years are very, very little. This is the challenge that we have in many governments, but you do not eradicate extreme poverty in 4 years so easily. You do not set up all the protection system you want to set up and so on. So the reality is the realism has to be very clear. She has to do a very strong work of communicating to the people what she can do and what she can't do. Because I agree, the expectations are extremely, extremely high, but the time is very limited. And in reality, we know the fiscal space has already been mentioned is limited. We know the series of the public debt, which has increased naturally. And so, we have not mentioned that, but there is a big elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is narco trafficking. Now, the US has not been focusing a lot in mentioning that, but we know this is a huge issue. Connected corruption, connected to organized crime, connected to, the possibility of controlling the territory. And so, I think there are serious issues. There are serious issues around also. I think civil society is the motor of everything. I'm a strong believer, and we work very closely, but civil society is also politicized, as the private sector, as the faith-based organization. So we need to work around that. And I think, we have to recognize that this is a country which has a lot of different conflicts within itself. Has got mainly conflict connected to land, access to land, resources, and there we go back to indigenous groups, not only Afro-descendant, indigenous groups, and that is where the pockets of huge conflictivity are in the country. And this goes also around the relationship with the private sector, the militarization of the society that Jennifer has mentioned, that we completely agree. So, this is one of the most dangerous countries for human rights defenders, in particular environmental human rights defenders. So, femicides, 1 woman a day is killed, 314 since the start of the year, with 95% impunity. So huge challenges. I think the only way is to see how everyone can pull together and look only having one focus: sustainable development for Honduras, eradication of poverty, inequality, and the critical issues of the country. And that is, for us, the 2030 agenda on sustainable development. That should be the path, and we'll keep working in that direction. But for sure, we need to pull, all together and look at what joins, what unites people, not what divides them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you all for your participation. I'll turn it over to Keith here in just a second. I'll just say this. My wife and I went to live in Honduras in 1986 and 1987, and we've followed the country ever since. And it's never been a challenge to think of the difficulties and the hardships in Honduras and the problems in Honduras. What's been a challenge is to be hopeful about Honduras. What's been difficult is to find a ray of hope in Honduras. And so I think what we see now is that little bit of glimmer of hope that makes people want to focus on the issues. They've always been there, and it's always been a reality, but now we can see that maybe we can make some difference in Honduras. And I think that's what we have to focus on right now. So thank you all. Thank you, Michael, Armando, Alice, Jennifer. I turn it back over to you, Keith, for your parting words of wisdom.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. Yeah, you can always depend on Eric and I to be the glass half full people. So we'll be here for that. And I just want to really thank the participants, Alice, Armando, Jennifer. You all are in Honduras and often at great risk. And I want to acknowledge that as well, that it's not work that's done risk-free. And Michael, you've done such a tremendous job across a number of countries in the hemisphere to draw out the issues. I love the Power Honduras idea. That's a fantastic one we need to pick up. The message I got was that glass is half full, but it could easily empty out if we're not careful. So let's all of us have some piece of this. Let's stay focused on building civil society and on the hard work that comes after an election and not drop off now. Tremendous insights, and we really appreciate everyone. We'll have this up on both the SIF web and the USIP web to go back and look at it again and spread the word. And again, really appreciate all of your time that joined us today, and our participants, especially for your dedication and for the insights you've shared with us today. Thanks again.
Thank you all.